I was thunderstruck in reading Excel spreadsheets this weekend about the presumed Q3 recovery in GDP. Do you buy a Q3 recovery, and can there be any persistence to it through Q4 and into Q1 of 2021?
So if we're talking about just one quarter to the next, of course, Q3 is going to have a positive number relative to Q2 for most countries. Indeed, for a number of countries in Asia, there's already been a bounce. But that's really not the relevant perspective. What we ought to be looking at, if we're concerned about the state of the economy, we ought to be looking about first, when does the pre-COVID level of GDP get re-attained? That takes us back to January. How long does it take? And for 60% of the world, our estimate is they're not even going to get to the pre-COVID level of GDP until sometime in 2022. So that is the first thing to be thinking about. Not what was the bounce between Q2 and Q3 this year, but how long does it take to get you back to where you were before this started?
So, Catherine, if you look at unemployment and if you actually look at consumption, which maybe gives us a clearer view of, when we can go back to the normal that we had at least at, end of 2019, when are you expecting, for example, the U.S. economy to create as many jobs as pre-COVID?
Well, if we think about getting back to the unemployment rate that we were at in January, say 3.5%, we don't even have that on our horizon. We don't get there in our forecast horizon. Now, we do see an improvement in GDP. We do see an improvement in consumption. But what's really lacking is business investment. And, of course, what's lacking is trade. And so you put that together, and you don't get to, your unemployment rate at the end of the year is twice, maybe more than twice, what it was at the end of 2019. So, that really tells us something about how difficult it's going to be to get out of this COVID disease hole. It's a very, very deep hole. It's going to take us a long time to get out.
Catherine, what about consumption? I mean, the U.S. consumer, but actually the worldwide consumer was, the biggest chunk of the sustained recovery pre-COVID. How will that be reacting in the next couple of months? Are people ready to go back to spending, or are we going to see a lot more saving?
Well, I think that, this is the real question that we were all looking at and using a lot of high frequency data in order to evaluate is how fearful are consumers. Now, some people look at the retail sales that we just got in the United States last week and say, oh, they're ready to spend. They're gonna come back roaring. But there's spending on apparel. That's obviously a good thing. But there's also spending on a lot of discretionary consumer services, ranging from entertainment, travel, restaurants, and leisure and hospitality in general. It is a large category. For some countries, it's an extraordinary large share of their GDP. So this is where we think that consumers are going to be, we have a bounce. People did want to go out and buy and spend, but there still will be a fear factor that will keep people from going back to normal. The second piece of that, though, of course, is that there are both rules and norms. You were talking about masks earlier, but it's also the distance between tables in a restaurant, or the distance between meat packers in a plant. And these rules and norms about how business responds to the crisis in order to make consumers feel better about, say, going to a restaurant, going to entertainment, these are going to affect the number of people employed. This is going to affect business investment. And those are important ingredients in thinking about the prospects for recovery going forward.